Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those who are wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to look at different life cycles, and we're going to explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are really not about the money. Rather, they are about your emotions that are associated with your finances. And the healthier we are emotionally, the better financial decisions we're going to make. Although we might be fairly general in our discussions, we'd love to hear from you. So please do reach out to us. You can find me on my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or anywhere else you might be listening to this. Life has its challenges. It has its ups and downs, and it has its curveballs. We live in a world that is ever growing in information and complexity. And this is in the best of times, when things are calm, so to speak. Add to this a life cycle event that can maybe even redirect the course of your life. And it's no wonder that people are not sure how to proceed. The unfamiliarity and importance of certain events like divorce can leave you dazed and confused. You know, you want to do the right thing. You want to take the right steps, but often you don't even know what that next first step is to be taken. Growing up, we have our role models. Some of them are great and wonderful people and great role models, and others not so great. After all, we can learn as much from a bad role model as a good one. Today, we're lucky to have Terrie Vanover on our show today to help us navigate away from dazed and confused to dynamic and contributors. Terrie is a divorce strategist and founder of Choosing to Rise. Terrie, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks.
Yes. Hey, it's so good to see you live and in person. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and we have a lot to cover and not that much time.
We always do. We always do. Hirsch and I always we always knock it out the park. It's going to be fun. Lots of great conversation. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and just trying to solve the dazed and confused in 45 minutes. We got a challenge it for us already. But, last time you shared about your background, and there's such a rich passion that comes from your background. I'm going to ask if you can share that again, if you would.
Yeah, so you'll hear in just a few minutes, I have a pretty thick Southern drawl. So my upbringing was, I was, poor country girl raised out in the country of Virginia. And my mom was a divorced single mom, very little money, very little education herself. So my background really was just kind of growing up in poverty. I was sexually abused as a child. Our father, my biological father, I think today we'd see it as a functioning alcoholic. But in those days, wasn't such a term, but he just pretty much took off after the divorce. I can count on one hand how many times I've seen him in person. And those experiences when I did see my biological father were pretty negative, said some pretty not so nice things, as a father. And so I grew up with, I now realize, a lot of trauma. And I really brought that into my own marriage. I do believe that we use our intimate relationships to heal a lot of those childhood wounds. And I was a needy, insecure, controlling wife. I'll admit it. And within a few short years, I was going through a divorce, and my divorce was hell. I made all of the mistakes that, I think a lot of people make. I wasn't resourceful. I was overwhelmed. I was riddled with anxiety and just kind of buried my head in the sand. And my ex-husband, I would say at the time, now we have those terms like high conflict ex and things like that. It was a very contentious divorce, and it was 2 failed mediations, 2 failed attorneys, tens and tens of $1,000s down the drain, only just to circle back. And we ended up right where we started. And, so it was just By the end of it, I was left homeless. I had lost my mom. I had lost all my savings and financial standings. And not to mention, I was hit by a van during this time. So my health had deteriorated. I had to have multiple surgeries. It was just when you just think it couldn't have gotten worse, it just kept getting worse. And when I came through it, though, I will say my divorce for me was also kind of like my rock bottom, in that I needed to take control back. I needed to do some healing work on myself. And the good news is, I really, I used this as a purpose. I looked at like, okay, this was a really horrible time. And now I know better. And now I want to teach other people how to do better, how to navigate the process better so that they don't make the mistakes that I made that, left me destitute. And emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of it really. And now, I will say that my ex-husband and we are friends. We hang out. His wife is like one of my best friends. She does my makeup. This is jewelry she buys me. I mean, we just really have put that co-parenting thing like into play. And I really believe that it is more possible than many people think. If they can do the inner work and do the healing work and navigate this process better and use resources and, use professionals like you and I, we know that there is a better way. But when you're so overwhelmed and you're so anxious and you also have everybody buzzing in your ear telling you what to do, how to do it. And sometimes you just need someone to help you stay on the high road. And I think that's really important. And, we've been able to develop a really great co-parenting relationship. But it's really hard because it triggers the hell out of you. And so you do have to be your highest self. You have to do the work on yourself. The other person is not going to change. My ex-husband didn't change, but how I showed up around him and with him has definitely changed. And I'm remarried. We've grown our family. And Maddie wanted me to make sure that I mention her name on the show. I have a daughter.
Hi, Maddie.
She said, "Oh, you're going to be on a show?" She's like, "Well, you got to mention me," and I was like, okay. So, but I mean, it really is a blessing because I thought that aspect of my life was over, after divorce. Who knew? I never would have guessed that, I'd be having another baby and there'd be this, family and so many wonderful things.
I think there's so many things in that. I mean, one that you mentioned, there are so many more resources than ever before. I call us, people who've been through a divorce, the new generation, not the next generation, but a new generation of divorce professionals, because we've experienced it and we've been there. Now, every divorce is a little different. Yes. Everyone is personal, and yeah. I encourage people to explore that. And I think education, you've spoken a lot about doing the work, educating yourself, doing the work on yourself, all very, very important. I'm a huge champion for that. Anyone who's listened to my show or anyone who's worked with me knows that. And I think, that includes the things to do and the things not to do. So I'm going to ask, can you share a little bit on some of the pitfalls you see people doing, or here's some of the not to do's when going through a divorce, because it's important. And it's easier to get into trouble than out of trouble. It's like debt. Yeah. It's easier to get into debt than out of debt, into a mistake versus out. So being aware of these pitfalls, I think, can be important as well, if you want to share some that you see.
Oh, absolutely. I bet you see this. The number one mistake that people make is using a legal process to get emotional justice. That is the number one mistake that people try to make. They try to use their divorce to get back at their ex or get it, yes, get at them and get revenge or whatever. And that is so unhelpful in so many ways. I think another...
And such a letdown. I just got to throw that in there because it doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not only like does it's so like emotionally unfulfilling, but financially, I'm sure you see the financial aspect of where people have used that to get back at their, and they're like, oh, that's not going to happen. So, and then I think another thing that people do is, like I think the biggest mistake I did, like you said, like I did not know that there were resources like us out there that could help us navigate this process and to educate yourself on the process and know that there are alternatives. I think one of the biggest mistakes is hiring an attorney first. And nothing against divorce attorneys. They definitely have their place. And I think they have their place in the process, but there's other things to do prior to getting a divorce attorney that would make the process better, faster, more financially, better in the long term. So many people jump to hire an attorney, and then the attorney tells you to go back and get all the financial documents. You could be doing all of that first. And also, I really think it's important to do the emotional healing first. I've even had people say, oh, I'm going to deal with the divorce first, and then I'm going to get into therapy, or then I'm going to, join your program or whatever. And it's like actually in reverse, because all the mistakes that you're going to be making come from an emotional place, from a place of scarcity and fear and loss and grief. So if you have the support system in place to help you become clear-minded and become, really just from a place of like your highest self, you'll be making decisions that are going to be more beneficial for you in the long term.
And that's why I love to cover a lot of emotional topics as I go through the shows, because as I said earlier, the healthier we are emotionally, the better financial decisions we make.
Isn't that true?
Education's wonderful. 100%. We need to, but just a caution to everybody out there is you need to make sure it's relevant information that applies to you. The laws apply state by state. They're not the same in every single state. So make sure those apply to you. Or you look at somebody who seemingly has a similar situation, but really doesn't. You don't know kind of what you said, the background that they've come from, what they're dealing with behind closed doors, what their priorities and needs are, can be extremely different to you, even though you look at their house and you look at the cars and you look at the kids and they all look the same as your family. It may be 100% different divorce that I think is important. The other thing that you said that I think I said in my sleep already is that emotions can be and often are the most expensive part of your divorce.
Ooh, I'm stealing that, Hirsch. Oh my God.
It's not a problem.
You got me shaking the computer.
I think, I've seen literally $80,000-$90,000 decisions that come from pure emotions that are not positive emotions. I can tell you that, and unnecessarily. And it's unbelievable when you look at some of the decisions that you make. And I think a lot of these people, when they look back and have healed a little bit or done some of the work that we're talking about, they look back and they go, what was I thinking, right? I mean, that was not my best moment,
Right.
And pitfalls are important to understand and to avoid them. And if you can, working with people like Terrie, who can guide you and know what's coming up sometimes when it comes to that and avoid them and navigate around them. But what are some of the things that you would say people absolutely should incorporate? I'm kind of going to the flip side of the discussion, but what are some of the things they absolutely should incorporate into their lives to make it kind of more positive activities and healthier for them?
So I would say, having the right team, having the right support, getting the right resources is number one. And I think people like you and I are more objective than, say, your sister or your mom or your brother who might have a hidden agenda or who might not be as objective. So having someone on the outside helping you, I got a coach who says, you can't read the label when you're inside the jar. And I just love that, because you need an outside perspective helping you to kind of see the big picture there and help you read the ingredients and help you maintain focus towards your long-term goals. And I bet you're really good at that, Hirsch, about helping people. Now, this is your long-term goal. Is this keeping you closer to that goal financially, or is this taking you away from that?
Prioritize, organize, simplify. That's what I try to do with my clients. You got to start with your priorities and values. You have to.
So, I mean, I would say that's the biggest mistake that I made. I mean, that because I didn't talk to the right, like mortgage professionals, for example, I, went bankrupt with my home and I didn't talk with financial people. I didn't do anything. Like again, I relied because I was just so overwhelmed. Again, it's exactly what you said. It was that emotional, I was like totally emotionally dysfunctional, which led to all the poor financial, decision making, the realty decision making, like all of that, all of the emotions were totally affecting what I was, doing. And so, okay, so I want to talk about self-care because that also has become a really, kind of cliche term that's been being thrown around in the health world, in the mental health world. And self-care is not about like bubble baths and treating yourself to ice cream necessarily. I really like to reframe that in terms of like self-parenting, treating yourself the way a parent would lovingly guide you, like, oh, you need rest, let's take some rest. Going to the gym, getting exercise, taking a walk outside. That's like more of a self-parenting thing where it's healthy for you. And also it's renewing yourself and giving yourself what you need in that moment in a loving, guiding way, not just giving into whatever treat you necessarily want. And I think it's also different for different people. For me, my workouts are it's just a non-negotiable, and my whole family knows that. And, meditation is a non-negotiable. I think journaling is really, really important. And to understand setting out your long-term goals, journaling is known to be twice as impactful for healing faster than not journaling. And it can help you process those emotions quickly. And also when it comes to self-care is not, good vibes only. It really is about tapping into our emotions and like, what am I feeling? What do I need? What am I needing in this moment? I'm needing just to accept that I'm having a bad day and that's okay. And self-compassion, radical self-compassion during divorce and after divorce, because I think one of the biggest myths that people don't understand is the level of loss that people go through when they go through divorce. They think like, oh, it's just you're like leaving your, like a breakup from, and it's really not. It's the loss of your future. It's loss of time with your kids. It can be the loss of a home, which is devastating. It's that stress of like not knowing what your future is going to be, and also the loss of what you thought your future was going to be. I mean, there's so many levels of loss that it's very difficult unless you've been through it to really understand it.
One of the things I see a lot when it comes to all of that is people try to fill that void or that hole by spending money on something else, and they don't work on them. And I'll be honest. I mean, 10 years ago, before my divorce, I probably was not the nicest person when it came to the ones that did do self-care and would kind of make fun of the yogi a little, And then I went through a divorce and somebody suggested it to me. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it like behind closed doors and not tell anyone. And, I'm the cold, heartless MBA CPA on the discussion here. And I live by that now. I've encouraged my kids to get into a lot of the self-care things that I never would have done prior to my divorce. The other thing I quickly actually do want to touch on as well, which I think you mentioned, but I think is worthy of kind of highlighting a little bit more, is finding your right team. And a team becomes a very powerful thing for you as well. Some people will work with people individually, and if that works for you, that's fine. But very often having your professionals work together because they kind of know the same language is a very important thing as well. You had mentioned, for example, it may be worth your while first working emotionally on yourself and getting the strength behind that. Sometimes there's an imbalance in power in a relationship, and knowing how to find your voice, knowing how to find out, the financials in your relationship if you weren't the one that managed them. And then let's say you bring in the attorney, it may be significantly quicker and more effective to have one of those other professionals kind of bring the attorney up to speed in some ways and work with them. I work with attorneys, for example, all the time in building the strategy on how do we approach, this negotiation around the finances.
I love that. Very, very important. That. And I think you're right, because like your attorney is not going to be, your therapist or your coach. Like, so they don't know how to deal with like the emotions that are coming at them.
Right.
And they aren't necessarily versed in long-term financial, impacts of your particular situation. So having a financial advisor on your team is really important, because they can help you discern what best to put into your marital settlement agreement. So I agree with you that having a team is just invaluable. And I don't mean to, earlier I was saying like the biggest mistake I think people make is hiring the attorney first. I think they have their place, and legally, I definitely would want someone reviewing my divorce if I was going through one, for sure. But it's about, I think people don't understand that there's all these other divorce professionals that you need to have on your team that can help you have a better relationship with the attorney and work more effectively. And I've spoken with attorneys who've actually left the profession even at some point, just because there's an overwhelming amount that people expect from attorneys, and it's beyond their capacity, thinking that they're the therapist and that they're a financial advisor and they're a realtor and they know about mortgages. And really, they're just really there to help you figure out your options in terms of the law. So it's invaluable to have a whole process and a whole team in place.
I would also add to that. When someone's emotional, they don't convey or communicate as effectively. And so having somebody else sometimes communicate, like I work with people and I help them identify their priorities, not just financial, but very often their priorities require financial resources, right? So obviously we work on things like that. While we identifying those, we also kind of look at what we believe are going to be the spouses, because then where those conversations are going to happen, or the difficult ones, or what to give up in order to get. But sometimes it's hard for those people to really communicate that effectively to the attorney, just because they're emotional, they might be a little disorganized, they don't know, how to communicate some of these things. They've never done it before. I'm not, it's just the reality of sometimes being in a very stressful situation. I think that becomes a way that now your attorney really knows what to fight for when they go into that negotiation. I have so much more to say on that, but we do have to take a break. Okay. Before we do, Terrie, can you give a quick, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, you guys got my information up there. That's great. Terrie Vanover. I'm on Facebook. I'm at Vanover Terrie on Instagram, and choosingtorise.com. You can remember that one because I've got that accent. So
I love the name, actually, because in many ways you do need to make that choice, or you can wallow in what you have if you're in a bad spot, but you can choose to rise. And I love that name. I think it's very telling. Yes. We will be right back in 2 minutes. Please don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman. And I am thrilled to have Terrie Vanover here today with us. We're on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, and we're talking about Don't Be Divorced, Dazed and Confused. I think at the best of times, life can be complex and throw us into a daze and confuse us. But I think we've spoken about, I'm going to recap a few things because there are some things that just are so important to kind of reiterate. We spoke about getting educated and understanding how to personalize that education for your situation, some of the pitfalls, some of the absolute to-dos to put into your life, and some of the things, as we said, to avoid, how to make things more relevant for yourself. We touched on, we didn't go too much in, but kind of understanding and knowing what your priorities and your values are, and kind of keeping your true north by living them and keeping them going. We spoke a little bit about perspective, which I think we're going to get into more. We did speak a little bit about kind of role models and generational role models, and we're going to dive into that as well. But one of the big things as well that we covered on and off was kind of the resources that are out there, building the right team. I think historically, even as little as probably 7 or 8 years ago, really there were very few resources outside of, everybody knew you got an attorney. Really there was very little else, and I think there's still the idea that just go to your attorney and they'll rally the troops or rally the team, and it doesn't always work that way. So with everything else in your divorce, you do need to take responsibility. I think that's very important. And that's one of the things is finding the right team and the right members of that team for you. And the one thing that we spoke about a lot, which I think is so important, is kind of the perspective, where we come from, knowing who we are. And one of the big things here is changing that perspective. When you get divorced, your life dynamic changes significantly. And this is not an easy thing to do. I don't want to put out there, it's, just, think about it differently. We've been conditioned in so many ways, and we've said you grow up with these role models, sometimes intergenerational role models. And, from a little kid, you fall into the intergenerational chain because you told that's your role, or, you're the oldest, there's certain expectations or whatever it might be like that. And then we're in the middle of the fog of all this emotion of a divorce. And then we want to step back and go, maybe I want to reevaluate all of this. How do you help people look at their situation, reevaluate, and think things through in those ways?
Yeah, so a really big part of what I do is to help them heal those wounds, those abandonment wounds, those, like you said, the conditioning. It's really considered little t trauma in a lot of us, and we're just not aware of it, and we don't know how it manifests in our everyday interactions, but especially it manifests in our intimate relationships. And so it is a process. It's a multifaceted process. Like you said earlier, I'm really proud of you for understanding how important self-care and taking care of yourself and taking responsibility for yourself is, because I think a lot of men in particular are conditioned not to do that. And that's a big part of it, is healing those wounds and healing that conditioning. And so a part of it is identifying our patterns and how our patterns manifest in our lives. So how were we conditioned as a child? How were we traumatized as a child? And so I help people really hone in and identify that root of that abandonment wound or that root of that trauma. And then we heal that and we look at how that manifests in their personal lives. But you'd be surprised. Well, you probably wouldn't be surprised. I think people are surprised at how much it manifests in their professional life and in their businesses. I'm not, because I do this day in and day out, and
Right.
maybe you're not, because that money's really not about money, but it's fun. I would say it's almost fun to see people who were kind of leading their lives in a certain way, and they come to me and they're here to heal from relationships, and they're here to heal their brokenness from their childhood. And lo and behold, their business takes off and they're this different person and they're more authentic and they're, finding new ways of being even in their professional lives, or they get that promotion, or, but it's like, well, yeah, because you've been conditioned to see money a certain way, or you got your validation from your money or whatever it was.
Right.
Or you felt like you use money as a sense of safety and security. That's kind of my thing. And so understanding that, hey, your spouse or your ex-spouse may see money in terms of freedom. And so if you two have different goals and you have different ways of seeing money, it is going to manifest how that shows up in your divorce. And just having a perspective of that is really, really key. And so, like you said, one of those, like you said, 10 years ago, I would have never been doing meditation or understood how much those traumas are held up in our bodies. And so having a multifaceted approach to this, using body work to heal, using breath work to heal, using journaling and specific conscious exercises to look at what we're holding on to, and forgiveness practices and rituals and all those things to really consciously bring those unconscious things that we've been conditioned with from childhood, and to really let go of those things if they're no longer serving us, and find out what it is that we do want and what is in service to us and what does make us feel good and what makes us feel aligned and what makes us be passionate in our business and in our future. So
anyone listening, I would say they need to be realistic as well. They need to be gentle with themselves. Something comes along with self-care. It's so easy to beat ourselves up, right? And we've become this on-demand society where we want it now, and like, how come I can't change it now, right?
Right.
It does take time, and we do sometimes slip back to the old habits that have been there 25 years instead of 25 days into our journey, right? And we need to be careful. I actually know somebody, I love the way she puts it. She's a divorce coach, and she says you can look at and you can say, I have a failed marriage, or you can say, this marriage is complete. I got all I could have out of it. Very different view, and brings a very different mental positioning of where you are in your life, coming from a failure versus coming from, I need to move forward. This was not the healthiest place for me, or whatever the situation was. You're
absolutely right, Hirsch. Like, reframing our perspective is a really, really key thing, and choosing that's really, it's a choice you have to make over and over. I choose to look at it like this, versus a failure. Yes.
And I like that word reframing, because I think it plays so well into my question that I'm going to ask you. Is we generally, as a society, have these impressions of men and women, right? Anecdotally, we say women are open up much more and they talk more and they got the pack mentality, whereas, men hold on to their feelings, and, you're a man, don't, like cry or something, or whatever it is, right? Is it different for men and women? You focus mostly on helping men through divorce. Is this something you find true, and is it different for men and women?
There are some differences, but, and I had tagged you on this really controversial post recently. Hirsch and I we're connected on social media, and this holistic psychologist had written about men and their emotions. And I would say that's one of the biggest questions, or things like, oh, do men talk about their feelings? And I'm like, yes, if men are given a safe space, they, my men's group has 1,500 men in it. And yes, they definitely talk about their feelings. I think, we live in a society where men they're not allowed to be vulnerable, and they're not allowed, it's seen as a weakness. And I think men are also put into a certain box. And if they're not in that box, then they're seen as weak. And again, this is a generalization too. And again, I was surprised at how many women on that post really were resistant to what the psychologist was saying about, it's time to allow men to have a full spectrum of emotions and to teach them how to be in touch with their emotions and to communicate their emotions.
Right.
And I just really felt like that was a valuable message that again, it's mostly women that ask me, that they'll say, you mean men talk about their emotions? And I was like, yeah, if they are given a space in which it feels safe, they definitely will talk. And it was surprising to me initially, the depth of grief I would see, the depth of pain. And what happens though, is men have been taught like not to talk about it, but to internalize it. And they'll harm themselves or threaten harm rather than getting support and seeking help. So I do think it's valuable for men to say it's okay to do what you need to do, to take time out for your own mental health and to speak about your emotions and get the mental help and health that you need. I think that we're not having that conversation enough. I think that the difference in divorce with men and women is for women typically are 80% of the times are the ones to file.
Right.
And the reason I think that is, I think there's a couple of reasons. It's a very complex issue, but I think that one distinction between men and women is that women tend to say how they feel. They'll say, I'm unhappy in this marriage. I'm unhappy in this marriage. I'm unhappy in their marriage. But men tend to look at actions versus words. So a woman just talking about it or saying it versus doing anything about it, once that woman files and she leaves, then it's almost like, holy shit, she was serious. Like, it's like their wake-up call.
Yeah.
So one of the differences I see with men and women have done a lot of the grieving and the processing prior to filing because they've been thinking about it for at least 2 years. And then they do it. And whereas men, it's like taken by surprise. They say to me, well, I knew we had our problems, but I didn't think it was that bad. And you're like,
they say that people are, the person who files is about 2 years ahead emotionally
yes.
and processing things. I would also say, one of the things that I think is so important that gets lost when we bucket people into that role or that gender is that this is a partnership. People have different needs. Everyone is different. One of the hardest thing about people dealing with people is they people,
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think those communications, and I will tell you, I have had so many women that I deal with that have said to me that the kind of most exhilarating part of the relationship was not the physical or it was when he would get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to kind of have this dichotomy of thought, like, yes, it's your spouse and you should be intimate and you should be vulnerable. But then we have society telling you as a whole on the large level, don't be. And, and then we're caught in the middle as a man, right? Or, women have their own expectations or, societal pressures. But I think really it's got to be a partnership and discussed together and figured out together what each one needs.
And I think it's scary for women as well to see their partners vulnerable, because again, we're not shown that model. We're not shown that from our fathers. We're not shown that in any way. And we're conditioned as a society that men are in this certain role. And if they are vulnerable, what does that mean? What does that mean for us?
Right.
So I think it's a really good conversation that we need to be having on a more in-depth level, because I was really shocked at how many women were kind of like really going after her post about, and I was like, y'all are missing, well, men should just, do the work, or but like, you're missing the point that men are conditioned from birth. We've even done studies where how people interact with boy babies versus girl babies
right.
are completely different. The language they use and the things that they focus on is very different. And so we need to be looking at that as a society. How are we conditioning our boys and our girls? But I mean, you could tell that so many women were kind of resistant to that. Like,
yeah, no, it was a fascinating read. And I think the comments were more fascinating than the post.
I thought so too. Because so many women, she was saying, women, we need to give our men space, and we need to allow them, we as women need to give them compassion and support. And so many women were like, screw that.
Yeah.
I was like,
well, the other thing is, if you want a partner, and later on in life, it's not about having kids and that, because you probably had them, right? I mean, I'm in my early 50s. I don't plan on having any more kids, but for me, it's about the relationship and the companionship. And, if you don't build that, and then you can't complain later, well, I'm lonely, he's never around, or he's, never expressing himself. At the same time, you may want to have a soft start and say, hey, I'm going to get vulnerable here, and like kind of prepare them, if that's what's needed. But again, it comes back to your values and your priorities, I think, in so many ways. You've got to know them, you got to keep them, and you always got to work towards them. And I think those are all very, very important pieces. And
it begins with self-awareness. And what I was seeing in those comments were a lot of hurt women. I just feel like it was a lot of women that had built up the walls, that were hurt themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's hard when you're in your own pain to hold space for others who are in pain.
That is very true. That is very true. I am going to ask for 1 minute, because we don't have much time. I'd rather end on a positive note than the pain note. This is maybe a loaded question, or, may not be a cookie cutter, but can you share generally what makes for a successful divorce? What does it look like for somebody going through a divorce?
I think that you always want to be, I think self-awareness is key. And as we've said over and over, getting the right resources, getting the right support, getting your team together, but also always having the kind of holding your values of like, when I look back at this divorce, am I doing this in a way that I will not regret? So making choices that that you're going to look back and like, okay, I'm not going to regret that. I'm not going to regret being the higher, taking the high road when it comes to co-parenting, because I'm always putting my children first. And so I think that's really, really key, is always keeping in mind, the long-term goals that you have, and say, am I going to look back at this one day and really regret this? Or am I going to say, okay, I did the best I could under the worst circumstances?
Right. You can reach out to Terrie at choosingtorise.com. Again, choosingtorise.com. I encourage you to reach out, learn more. There is stuff on a website that is interesting for you as well, that I think you can benefit from. And unfortunately, we got to start wrapping this up. So Terrie, thank you so, so much. The information and just the discussion is always amazing when we get together, but the information that you help cover in such a short time is wonderful as well. I am Hirsch Serman, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website. It is lifecycle.financial. That is lifecycle.financial. Please reach out to me with any questions you might have for me, or if you miss Terrie's, to try to get in touch with her. You're welcome to reach through me as well. Thank you to CC Schatz, my producer, working behind the scenes, making it all happen, that we can just have this lively discussion. And I look forward to you joining me on my next show. Thank you so much. Have a great week.